Well, welcome everyone to this new series, Mind Games. I'm really pretty excited about this series, which doesn't mean it's going to be good, but it does mean I'm excited about it. And the reason I'm excited that we're doing it at the first of the year is one, because I really do believe this is something that all of us need to understand. We haven't talked about it in more than a decade around here. And the reason I'm excited we're doing it at the beginning of the year as well is it's at the start of the year, and this is going to be a little bit weird for some of you, and that gives us the whole rest of the year to sort of recover. That video that you just watched before we started the message is that it really is the idea behind this series. The idea that there's an invisible world that impacts everything that's going on in your life. That's at the heart of what we want to talk to you about in this series, Mind Games. It's probably hard for you to believe, but this is absolutely factual true that about 100 years or so ago, most doctors in our world believed in something called spontaneous generation. And what I mean by that is they thought that diseases just popped into existence out of nowhere, that they couldn't really explain the cause, that it didn't really have anything to do with what people was around people. It was they just sort of happened. And then a group of scientists like Louis Pasteur and others began to talk about this invisible force that really was at work in everything around us, and you couldn't see it with the naked human eye, but that it lived everywhere and put in the right circumstance, in the right environment, with the right person, that germs would so infect a person that it would cause disease to happen. But as hard as it is for us to believe, again, about 100 years ago, the majority of doctors, medical professionals in our world would listen to that and go, no, wait a second. You're telling me there's something we can't see that infects what we can see, that there's something that's so small that you can't see it on the surface, but you say it lives on surface, it can blow around in the wind, that it happens all around us, and that it impacts what physically we can see, and that it can destroy and ruin human lives, relationships, whole communities can be destroyed by this invisible force. And of course, today we hear that and we think, well, of course, that's the way germs are. I mean, all of us now believe in germs. In fact, some of you believe so much in germs that you're almost like addicted to disinfecting everything. You've got like hand sanitizer with you, and particularly this time of the year, you won't want to touch anybody, you don't want to be near anybody. You're sanitizing yourself all the time because you believe in this invisible thing. You can't see it, but you think things look clean, but they're not clean. There are germs everywhere around you, and you believe that they have an impact on you, on your family, on your kids, on your health, on everything around you, and that they can destroy everything. Well, that's a really good analogy for what we're going to talk to you about in this series. That there is an invisible force, there's an invisible thing that's all around us, and that it impacts every one of us every single day. And it doesn't simply impact us physically. It impacts us relationally, it impacts us emotionally, it impacts the world around us, it impacts the way you see it. It's going to impact how you wind up hearing this today. It can be emotionally life-threatening. It ruins marriages. It ruins parent-child relationships. It affects everything in our world. It's an invisible world. It's around us all the time. It impacts everything we do. And yet as we talk about it, some of you are going to find yourself being like people 100 years ago who, when they first heard about germs, they're going to go, now wait a second. You're saying there's an invisible force that I can't see that has an impact on what I do in my physical life. You're telling me there's something that I can't see, that I can't put my hands on, but that it tangibly impacts everything going on around me. That is really, really hard for me to believe. But the truth is, there's an invisible world that's all around you, and it impacts everything in our world and in your life. And for many of us, you can't see this in a microscope, but you don't even need a microscope. All you need is a rear view mirror. Because if you look back in your life like I've looked back in my life, you look back and you think about some things you did 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and you look at them and you go, how could I have been so stupid? How could I have thought that that would be good for my marriage? How could I think that not talking to somebody would eventually lead to deep relational connection? How could I think that withholding information, how could I think handling my money that way? How could I think treating my kids that way? How do I think manipulating people how could I get to that place? And what was clear to everybody around you, you couldn't see. It made perfect sense to you, and you did it, but now you look back at it in your rearview mirror and you say, I was so deceived. It was distorted to me. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why I can't see it. I mean, it's so clear to me and now that was a dumb idea. But in the moment, when the opportunity came about, it made perfect sense to you at the time to do. It was crazy, and you think about it and you think, I should have seen that coming. How could I have missed it? But now, you're paying the price physically, you're paying the price relationally, you're paying the price emotionally, you're paying the price financially for things you did that you now look back at and you see in your rearview mirror, you go, how could I have missed that? It is so crystal clear. Some of us can't yet see it in the rearview mirror, and the reason you can't see it in the rearview mirror, you could see it in the mirror if you just look around you. I mean, there are people all around you watching what you're doing, and they're trying to tell you what you're doing doesn't make sense. But in the moment, put you in the right environment with the right people, and you do things that don't make sense to you. In fact, you've had the experience recently where you could see it in the mirror where you make sane, rational decisions. You sit with people that are helping you, and you make decisions in rational environments, sometimes in church like this. In your right mind, you make a decision about what you're going to do in your marriage, what you're going to do with your kids, what you're going to do financially, how you're going to live your life, how you want to be trustworthy and true, and then you leave that environment and you get with the wrong person in the wrong environment, in the wrong place, and you do the exact opposite. And when you come back and look at yourself in the mirror, you go, how did I do that? What was I thinking? Why would I wind up like that? Am I losing my mind? And then you go back and you make sane, rational decisions, and you make the right choices. You decide what you're going to do, but in the wrong environment, you go right back out and you blow it all again. And you think to yourself, what is wrong with me? Why do I do that kind of thing? And if you can't see it in the rearview mirror or in the current mirror of your life, I bet you can see it in people that are around you. I mean, you watch people that you know and you care about, and you watch them make decisions, and some of you have kids, and you watch them making choices, or for some of you, this is your parents. You watch your parents, and you watch your friends, people that you dearly love, and they're so smart in most areas of their life, and then you watch them do something, and you think, what are they thinking? Why would anybody think that was a good thing to do? And I've told them, and I've showed them, and we've talked about it, and they agreed with me, and their friends told them, and the preacher told them, and everybody got on the same page, but they can't see it when they start doing. What are they thinking? But in their mind, it makes perfect sense at the moment they're doing it. You can see it looking back. I mean, you can look back in our country's history. You look at our world history, and you see some things that we have done to each other, the way we have treated each other, where we've killed each other and we've justified it, where we look back at what previous generations of people who were just like us, where we've taken groups of people, whole groups of people, and we just mistreat them. And you look at that now and you think, how could people do that? What were they thinking? Well, in this series, we want to try to give an answer to that, but it's not really our answer. This is Jesus' answer. And I know a lot of you have come because you're followers of Jesus. I mean, probably the majority of us that are here that are followers of Jesus. And some of you have come because you're investigating Jesus, because you're attracted to Jesus. You don't know about the church and all of that, but you're attracted to Jesus. And I just want to tell you, this series is Jesus' answer to the dilemma we just presented. And that's the reason we're calling it Mind Games, because that's how he described what this is about. That there's a force that's at work in our world, and we can't see it, and it creates confusion, primarily in our minds. There's a distortion of the truth that is happening in your mind, and it's just enough to give us trouble. It's not so much that we'd ever run away from it. And the one behind the mind game that's going on in our world, he's never going to tip his hand. He's never going to reveal what's going on, because then it becomes too obvious. And if it became too obvious to you, you'd run away from it, and you'd be done with it. Now, Jesus gives some real specific insight on this several times throughout the Scripture. And the place that I want to show you as we kick this series off, and I just sort of introduced this big idea, and I'll just tell you, I'm not going to solve anything in this. I just want you to begin to think about this. The place that I'm going to show you is in a book called John. It's one of the books that talks about what Jesus said and what he did. And in This is in John chapter 8. If you want to go and read it later today, it'll be on the screen, the part that I'm going to talk about. But before I get to the part I want to read to you, I just want to sort of give you the context to this. Jesus is having some conversations with some religious leaders. And the setting for their conversation is that they don't really trust who Jesus is. I mean, Jesus has been around long enough now at this point in his life that when this conversation takes place, I mean, he's traveled enough and he's said enough and he's taught enough impactful kind of things and he's done enough and unbelievable miracles that most common people are looking at him and they're saying, hey, I think he's probably the one that God said was going to come and deliver human beings. I think he's the one. I mean, look at what he does. Look at what he says. But these religious leaders that Jesus is having the conversation with, they don't see it. In fact, they look at what he does and say, and they go, come on now. He's not the Messiah. He's not the one that God is sending. That's not who he is. And the truth is, these religious leaders, when you think about it, they should have been the easiest ones to convince because they're the ones that knew all the things that God had said that the chosen one would do. And in fact, Jesus would often quote scriptures to them that they knew themselves that predicted what he would be doing, and he was doing them and showing them that he was doing them. But they just couldn't see it. So Jesus is having this conversation with them, and he's saying, hey, come on, guys, after all you've seen, after all you've heard, after all I've done, after you see what is obviously God at work, how can you not see who I am? And their response to him is, hey, we don't need you to be from God. You say you're from God, but we don't need you to be from God because we have Abraham. Abraham, we're Jews. Abraham was our father, and we have Moses, and if you were it, Abraham and Moses would have told us, and so you're just another false prophet. And what they meant is, we just can't see it. We don't see it the way you're seeing it. Jesus says, look, you say you're sons of Abraham, but if you were really sons of Abraham, you would see who I am because Abraham knows who I am. And if you're really followers of Moses, you would know who I am because Moses knows who I am. And if you're really followers of God, you'd know who I am because God knows who I am. The problem is, you aren't really followers of God. And then Jesus lets them know who they're really following, that there's something more at work, that there's not just they can't get it, there's something more at work that's keeping them from seeing it. Why is it with all that he's done? Why is it with all that they've seen? Why is it when he quotes the scripture to them that they knew so well and they could see it coming to life in what he's doing, that he has come from God? Why is it in the face of all of that evidence they still can't see that he's from God? So this is the conversation, and I'm going to read to you starting in John chapter 8, verse 43. Again, we're jumping right in the middle of this conversation, but remember all that I've talked about up to this point. Jesus says, why is my language not clear to you? I mean, guys, why you want to know why you can't get it? I'll tell you why you can't get it. It's because you belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. Hey guys, I'll tell you why you can't recognize who I am, because there's a deceiver, and he's deceived you. That in the face of overwhelming evidence, in the face of the miracles that I've done, and the profound teaching that I've given, from the obvious works of God, there is a mind game going on, and he has fooled you to the point. He is deceiving you. You are under the power of. You are working with your father, the devil. Now, I just know that some of you who love Jesus, some of you are followers of Jesus, and you have this picture of Jesus, that Jesus was so kind to people, and he loved everybody, and he told everybody that they were okay and that God loved them no matter what. You can't believe Jesus was so confrontational. But he says to them, hey, Abraham ain't your daddy. The devil is your father. And I'll just say to you, you're arguing with somebody can't get it sometime. Try working that into the conversation. Hey, the reason you can't get it is because you're of the devil, sir. And you're doing out his work. You're deceived by him, and you're causing confusion. That's why you can't see what I'm saying. That's hard to get in a conversation. But here's Jesus. And the point of this, he's saying, I mean, you read this, and At this point, some of you are thinking, well, I get, okay, Jesus said there was a devil, but Jesus is just using a figure of speech. It's just an analogy. Jesus doesn't really believe there's an actual devil, an actual force. He's using an analogy. I mean, I call people the devil, but I don't believe there's actually a devil. Well, you could say that if you didn't read the rest of what Jesus had to say. He says, he, talking about the devil, he was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he, the devil, lies, he speaks his native tongue, for he is a liar and the father of all lies. Now, that's what Jesus believed. You don't have to believe this. But this is what Jesus believed. Jesus believed that there was an entity, that there was a force, that there was a personality, that there was an entity at work in our world. He called him the devil, Satan, the enemy, the adversary. And he believed that his ultimate agenda was murder, that he wanted to destroy everything that was good about God's ultimate creation. He wanted to create confusion in such a way to destroy human life and all that's good. And the way that he does that is he deceives. He lies. Now, just so you know, because you've seen lots of movies where you see demons and stuff, and they're so powerful, in no way is the devil as powerful as God. And if you're a follower of Christ, you don't have to be worried about this kind of thing. I'm trying to just pull back and let you see the truth about this. The devil is in no way as powerful as God. He can't do all things. He can't be everywhere at once. But he does want to destroy God's ultimate creation, human beings, and his weapon to use against us is primarily he deceives. He has a deception. He uses the truth. He twists it just enough. I mean, there's this unseen entity that is at work in everything around you, and he's playing mind games on me and you all the time and in our culture, and the results are in human life and everything that's valuable to human beings, at work in marriages, in parent-child relationships, in sibling relationships, in relationships with people, in politics, and everything that are around us. He's at work. He's against at it, and his only tool, his primary tool that he uses is deception. It's as though he takes a thought, and it's so confusing in the human mind, and he makes you think what's wrong is right, and what's right's wrong, and he twists it just enough to get you off track, that people do things that make absolutely no sense to people watching them, but at the time, it makes perfect sense to them. And that's what Jesus believed. In fact, he makes it clear in a couple of other places that I'll show you. He's talking to his closest followers in this one. He says, I will not speak to you much longer. And look at this. For the prince of this world is coming, and he has no hold on me. Jesus believed that this entity was the prince of this world. Now, I'll just say to you, don't send me emails, don't ask me, Ed, I got 5 questions about this prince of the world thing. I'll just say to you, I don't have a lot of answers on this thing. I'm telling you what Jesus believed. But it doesn't bother me that I don't have answers on all of this, because the truth is, I carry one of these in my pocket every day, and I could not tell you in any scientific way how this actually works in a way that anybody could put it together and make it work again. I don't understand how all of this works, but that has not kept me from applying it to my life. The fact that I can't explain every detail of how this cell phone works, I carry it with me, I apply it to my life, I'm thankful for the benefits of it. So the fact that there is something that I don't completely understand, that I do believe has impact on my life, that's not a problem for me. There are numerous things around me like that every day. And since Jesus is the one I follow, and I believe he's right about everything, Jesus believes that there is an unseen world that's around us. And he believed that it somehow impacted our world, and that somehow this force, the deceiver, was the prince of this world. That this world was his domain. Our culture is his domain. Or how about this one? This is another follower of Jesus named Luke that records what Jesus said. Jesus has this interaction with the devil. You may have heard of it, where the devil takes him and he tempts him to try to trick Jesus, distorts truth. And listen to what he says. The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant. He showed Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. And catch this. And the devil said to him, I will give you all of their authority. Now wait a minute. For you to offer me something, that means you actually have to have it to offer it to me, right? I mean, here's the next verse. And he, the devil, said to Jesus, I will give you all their authority and the splendor, for it has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. Now again, don't write me, I don't have all the answers to how all this works out. But I believe that there's a force at work, that we live on a planet and there is a person, an entity that Jesus refers to as the devil, as the enemy, and that the agenda he has for us is a destruction of all human life, all that is good in human life, all the relationships that human beings love. And the way that he accomplishes that is he plays mind games. He deceives us. He distorts the way we see things. Now, that's troubling, isn't it? I mean, but it also explains some things, right? I mean, maybe, just maybe, this explains some stuff you've seen in our world. Maybe this is something that you ought to take into thought when you think about what you've seen in your family. Maybe, just maybe, this has been a factor in your struggles at home. Maybe this has been a factor in your struggle with your son or your daughter or with the guy at work, or that weird thing where you have moments of clarity where you're so clear on the right thing and you know it's the right thing and people tell you it's the right thing, and then you have a moment of insanity where you cannot do the right thing. I mean, I know what I need to do. I'm committed to do what I need to do, and I go out and I do the exact opposite. What is that? Is it just you? Are you just the one that's all messed up? Or maybe there's an invisible world, there's an entity, there's an enemy that is distorting the truth and is impacting you. He's not making you do something, you're choosing it. But he's distorted the way you see it in such a way that you consistently get it wrong. A couple of decades after Jesus has gone back, he's resurrected, and he's gone to heaven, there's a follower of Jesus named Paul, and he started churches, and he's writing to one of those churches, and he's trying to talk to them about what it means to follow Jesus. So he talks to them about marriage and parenting and work and all the real details of the life. The end of this book is so practical. And then right at the very end, there are some verses after all this practical stuff that just seem totally out of context, unless they are the context of what we've been talking about today. I want you to listen to these. He's just talked to them about how to do marriage and how to do work and how to get along with each other. And then he says these words, and I want you to listen to them in light of what I've just talked to you about, what Jesus believed about this world. Paul says, I want you to put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's, what's the very next word? Schemes. Paul believed what Jesus believed, that there was an enemy, that there was an entity, that there was a devil, and then he has a scheme. He has a plan. He has a strategy, and his plan's pretty simple. He distorts the truth enough, not so much that you'll see it, but that you'll actually believe that what he's distorted is the truth, and you will act on that truth. He changes it just enough so that you see the whole world, and you see your marriage, and you see your kids, and you see the people around you in a way that you act on it. It's not so distorted that I'll run away from it, but it's distorted enough that it affects me. There's a scheme. There's a plan. And when you begin to factor this in, maybe, just maybe, if you could begin to factor in that there's something invisible that's distorting the truth that you think, the thoughts that you have, maybe you will interpret some of the things you've been experiencing, and you'll begin to have an aha, that's what's at work. You can have that kind of moment. I mean, listen to what else Paul says. And I'll just say to you, if you're in the middle of a relational issue, maybe your marriage is in an issue, or maybe you're in a parent-child kind of thing, maybe you ought to factor this in more than you've been factoring it in. Listen to what he says. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's not your spouse that's the problem. I'm not saying they didn't do something wrong, but it's not just them that's the problem. It's not your kid that's the problem. It's not that they don't do things wrong. It's not that. It's not your boss that's the problem. Paul says, You have to remember to factor in. It's not just what we see. There is an invisible world that's at work, and it works on me, and it works on the people that I love. It impacts the visible world around us. There's the unseen that impacts the seen. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Wow. Now, that's Paul that wrote that, not some science fiction horror writer. Dark places, heavenly realms. And that's Paul that wrote those words, love is patient, love is kind. Those beautiful words that you had read at your wedding that you love. Paul wrote that. Paul who said, hey, parents, obey your children. You're going, oh, man, Paul, I love that verse. I use that with my kids every day. Paul, you seem so smart. You seem so wise. You say so many good things. You believe there's a devil? You believe there's an invisible world that's impacting my world? You believe there's something at work that's distorting the truth and the way I see the world? Is that what you believe? And Paul's like, well, yeah, that's what I believe. And he's a murderer. And he's trying to destroy everything good in humanity. He's trying to ruin everything good in your life. He's trying to disrupt everything about your life. And the way he does it is he is playing mind games. He's distorting the truth just enough to deceive you. Now, there are probably all kinds of reactions to what I've just said in the last several minutes. Some of you are thinking, finally you're talking about it. I've been coming to this church for a long time, and I thought you didn't believe this stuff. I thought I was the only person here. Finally you're talking about it. Some of you are thinking, finally. Others of you are thinking, well, I'm glad you talked about it, because most of the time when I read those verses, when I'm reading through the Bible, like in my discipleship group, when I'm reading through those verses, I sort of glaze over those verses because I don't know what they mean. But I'm telling you, now that you've talked about that one verse, I'm going to use that on my spouse. I'm going to say, honey, the reason you can't understand what I'm trying to tell you is because you're of the devil. He's your father. Jesus said it. But then there are others of you that are listening to what I said, and you're the group that I want to talk to for a minute. I mean, maybe this is your first time here, or your first time in church, or your first time in church in a long time, and you're thinking, or maybe you're a follower of Christ and you love what we do here, but you're thinking to yourself, okay, that last little 25, 30 minutes, that was weird. And I don't like that. And I get that you're skeptical. I get why you understand that, because you already have an explanation for why people do the weird things they do in this world, and you don't need a devil to explain it. You don't need a devil to explain the stuff you see going on around you, that there's some dark force at work in this world. You don't need that. But just for a second, can I ask you, I mean, you got an explanation for why you and your ex-spouse couldn't get along. It's because, they were goofed up, and they had a lot of background, and you should have seen it beforehand. That's on you, but they were just goofed up, and that's why you couldn't get along. There's not some deceiver at work that ruined your marriage. But maybe just for a second, could I ask you about, can we move past those everyday kind of things you talk about, and can we talk about something else that I bet you have? Haven't there been times where you've looked at something, or you've seen something, or something comes on the news, and it's so big, and it's so unbelievable, and you hear about something, and you think to yourself, that is just evil. And you don't really have another word to use with it. It's just evil, and you know it's evil. Isn't it true that sometimes you just see something, and you can't explain what would make a human being do that? Just real recently, I watched a great documentary, HBO documentary on the Boston Marathon bombing from just a couple of years ago. And when you watch that, and there's so much footage because of cell cameras and store cameras and all that, you can just watch the whole thing take place. And there's these two brothers come to this country, and they've gone to school in this country. They had a lot of privilege in this country. But their minds get distorted. The truth gets distorted a little bit, and they decide, they plot and plan and scheme, and you watch them on tape as they make these, and they get these homemade bombs, and they walk among hundreds, thousands of happy people who are there just to celebrate a family tradition for a lot of them. They come every single year. And you watch them take these backpack bombs and walk right over to groups of elementary children and set them down. And you watch the destruction that comes about. And you think to yourself, why would somebody do that? But here's the thing. They thought they were doing good. It's not just that they did it. Something had distorted it so much that they heard it, they saw it, they thought it, and they thought what they were doing. They had felt so much pain, or the truth had gotten distorted, that they thought what they did was good. How does that happen? You think back to, you don't have to go that far back in history, and you see a group of people that they single out a race of people or a religion of people, and they decide that in their country, for the good of their country, what they've got to do is they got to fence off that group of people. They got to get them together, and they got to get them away from normal people, and they got to get them to register, and they got to get them into a group, and then eventually they move them into little areas where they're all by themselves, and then eventually they take that area away from them, and they put them in camps where they can number them and have them, and they get to a place where eventually they convince themselves that what we have to do is we have to wipe them out by the thousands, and they have ovens and they have ways of systematically killing them. And you watch as this takes place, and none of it takes place because somebody got angry one day and pulled out a gun and gunned down a bunch of people. This wasn't rage taking place. They had a plan. They had an agenda. They had a scheme. They had a killing machine that they had worked up, and it was efficient, and it was good, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people bought into it, and they believed that they were doing what was good for the world, good for their country, good for all people by killing a group of one people. And we look at it now and we just go, it's evil. But you miss the part of they thought it was good. These are people pretty much like us. It's just distorted. And now even people in the nation of Germany look back, and people look at that period in their history and they think, what were we thinking? How could we have done that? And how about child pornography? Explain that. I mean, that's not just a bad idea. It's an industry in our country, in our world. I mean, we could go on and on. Think about this one. Many of us in these rooms, many of us in this room are just a few generations removed from people who believed that slavery was a good idea. We are just a few generations removed by blood. I mean, some of us are blood related to people who were just a few generations ago believed slavery not only was a good idea, it was a God idea. They believed that God really did not love all human beings equally, that he loved some people more than others, and that some people, some human beings were a little above animals, and so it was okay for us to treat them like animals. And we look at that and we go, who would do that? How could they think that? How could anybody believe that was right? And you look at the stuff that goes on, and how could that become such a universal thought? These thoughts that happen, they take place again and again all over the world in different cultures and different people. If there wasn't, you drill down deep on it, on any of these, and you see a plan and a scheme. And how could that take place without an entity, without a deceiver? And yeah, it's hard. And yeah, I don't have all the answers to this if you try to email me, but when I pause long enough and I look at many of the things in our culture, I look at many things in our world, I look at many things in our church that I see in people's lives, and how easy it is for people to have an idea that's just off this much and it ruins their marriage. People that have an idea about how they ought to behave that's off this much and it ruins their kids. People that are off just this much and it ruins politics. And in the end of it is the destruction of human life and human relationships. It drives me back to Jesus, who I follow, who when I read him, it's like he's saying, hey, I tried to tell you 2,000 years ago, there's a deceiver at work. You can't see him, but he's at work and he's a murderer. And he accomplishes the destruction of God's great creation, human life. He does it by deception. And one of his best tools for many of us is he makes us think he does not exist. So you just blame the stuff around on other flesh and blood, and he gets away with it. But there's an invisible world that impacts our visible world every single day. So, what are the next steps to this message? If you'd go ahead and grab your connection card, I just want to talk to you about that for just a moment. If you'd take a connection card, like the campus pastor said, if you'd go ahead and put your name on it, I just want to tell you, even though this might have been weird, we aren't going to treat your information weird. We aren't going to put you like on some weird mailing list. We're not going to come to your home. We're not going to do anything weird. We just want to thank you for coming, and we're not going to push any agenda on you. But on the back, it also talks about next steps. And in a message like this, I mean, we ask everybody to do this every week, to think about what's their next step on this. The truth is, I don't know that I have any next steps, because really, I was just trying to introduce you to a big idea. Not to try to scare anybody, because again, followers of Christ don't have to be scared of this. Jesus says that the power in us is greater than this power that's at work, but we have to be aware of it. We have to be able to combat it. And even though I don't understand it all, I believe that Jesus is right about everything, and I've seen enough in my own life, and I've seen enough in the life of people that I love, that I lean hard to. And so I'll give you one practice that I practice these days that maybe could be the beginning of a next step for you. Here's something I'm praying pretty hard for people in my family, for people that I love, for our staff. I'm praying this pretty hard these days. This could be the start of a next step. In fact, I'd love for everybody in this series. And I don't even see, if you don't believe this, how this could be a harm for you, if you just begin to pray this. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Father in heaven, would you keep all falsehood and lie far from me? Would you help me to see the truth? This is why I pray. As a part of that prayer, I pray, God, help me see this thing the way you see it. Help me see this relationship the way you see it. Because if I could see it the way you see it, I could probably do what you do. Keep lies and falsehood far from me. Another next step for many of you is that we're going to have groups that are starting this week, and you could get in a group and you could talk with other people about this, and maybe we could gain some traction on this. Tonight, if you've not done group before, if you've already been in a group and you liked your group, just go on back to your group. They're starting up this week. But if you've not been in a group, tonight's group link at 7 p.m. at the Sharpsburg campus. You just show up and we'll help you get in a group, and maybe they can help gain some traction on this, because the truth is there's a deceiver, and he's at work in the invisible world. He's at work in your life all around you, and it's affecting the visible world. And I'm not saying that because you need to be afraid. This is not like some horror movie. He's just going to poof show up. That's not true. That's not the kind of fear that you need to have. The concern is that our thoughts get distorted. The things we think are true get distorted. The thing we think about our morality, and the way we think about sexuality, and the way we think about our kids, and the way we think about money, and the way we think about politics, all of it gets distorted, and it winds up destroying human life. That's what we need to be aware of, and that's what we need to talk about. The concern is that our thoughts get distorted, that there is a deceiver playing mind games. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at some of the major areas that have been distorted and pray that God and His Word, that what Jesus said, that the truth would set us free, and that God would keep lies and falsehood far from us. I hope you'll be here for the whole series. Let's pray. Father, I pray that that would be true for every person joining in, whether they believe in all this stuff that I've talked about or not, that you would keep lies and falsehood far from them. God, that you would make the truth evident to us in our marriages. Show us the truth. Help us to see it the way you see it. In our parent-child relationships, help us to see it. In our relationships at work and people around us, help us to see things the way you see it, so that then we can do what you would do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.